we ran into a lot of the headaches that probably typical with builders, subcontractors not showing up, weather delays, theft, and really we're struggling to execute the quality of a project that we wanted, because it mattered to us that this was built well, and the continuous frustration with site-built construction really led us to look for a better way to build, and that's where we started doing prefab construction. By building in a controlled environment, we're minimizing weather, we're able to have a full quality control process. It's minimizing 90% of the waste. By building in a factory, you can get that scale and then deliver it in a way where you're really being efficient. Technology is changing, and by building in a controlled environment, we can utilize a lot of those systems for construction to really, enhance the building process.
Hey friends, welcome back to the Your Project Shepherd podcast. I am your host, Curtis Lawson, and today we're going to be talking about prefab construction and ADUs and all the things that Rame and Rame Hruska at Intexture and Aura Dwellings do. And so today I've got Rame with me. Russell wasn't able to make it, unfortunately, but she knows it all, so she's gonna do the job of both of them, right? You'll do double duty for us today. So, Rame, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and share what we're doing.
Cool. So, ADUs are something that I had not heard of even 20 years ago when I first started. I'm sure it's been around, but the term ADU, I think, has really become popular and over the last decade or so. It's really seen a lot of growth, and I first started hearing it more out in the kind of the California market, and I'm hearing it more in the Houston market in different parts of the country now. Why? First of all, what is an ADU? Define it, and then why is that starting to become more popular?
Well, ADU stands for accessory dwelling unit, and really what that means is it's an accessory to a main house. So these started out as, a guest house or, extra rental space in your backyard, and they can be freestanding or detached from the main house. So it's a way of getting more density on a lot, but still keeping the scale and context of a single family dwelling. And
that's why it's really popular in places like California, where land is at a premium and the property is so expensive, and they're looking to maximize that land use, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've shipped to California, and we've done a number of homes. We're actually in process on some homes for Altadena, and the buyer there, really an ADU to them is a no-brainer. Everybody wants an ADU. We've also delivered a number of ADUs to Austin, and that's something that's changing here in the Houston market. Also with some of the new ordinance requirements, where it makes it easier for people to do these in their backyard.
Yeah, as urban land starts to get obviously more scarce, more expensive, and people struggle sometimes to be able to afford it, the possibility of having additional income on a rental unit is big. But just also people who are looking to do more multi-generational living, right? Having parents, extended family, children on the property makes sense for all those kinds of situations, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're delivering right now a home to Westview that has an ADU in their backyard. And that's exactly their scenario. They have, family that comes into town for extended periods of time. They wanted them to have a guest house where they could feel comfortable, but it also gives them flexibility if they want to use that for the kids to have sleepovers, a home office. So it really gives people a lot of flexibility in how they can use their space.
Yeah. So you guys do a lot more than just ADUs. I kind of use that as an intro. I mean, I guess I should back up just a little bit. Tell us a little bit about, what you guys do, kind of what you started doing with the transition and kind of what you're focusing on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we started out just as architects, and we founded our firm, Intexture Architects, back in 2000. We started doing really, high-end custom homes was really our base. We love modern design. And really to do that, we really saw that we needed to build our own projects. So we started doing site-built construction so that we wouldn't get to the end of a design and not have the budget right or be able to execute some of these details on high-end homes. So through that process of doing our own site-built construction, we also started doing development, and we ran into a lot of the headaches that probably typical with builders, subcontractors not showing up, weather delays, theft, and really we're struggling to execute the quality of a project that we wanted because it mattered to us that this was built well, and the continuous frustration with site-built construction really led us to look for a better way to build, and that's where we started doing prefab construction. So we've been doing that for over 10 years now, and it's really been a great process for us to really solve a lot of these headaches with site-built construction, because by building in a controlled environment, we're minimizing weather, we're able to have a full quality control process, and that's something we couldn't do in the site built world. As much as you want to look at everything, it's just physically impossible to get up and look at every single flashing detail on a job site. But in the factory, we can really do that, and that's part of our process. So everything gets inspected, all the flashing details, all the nailing patterns, everything that goes into the building is checked off with our quality control. So that's really enhanced our projects, and for us it's really just really streamlined the construction process.
And so you guys actually own the facility, right? You are the manufacturer. There's some other folks that are doing some offsite construction, some prefab construction. There's a lot of kind of modular companies out there that I think partner with different people to make their products for them. But you guys are actually doing it yourselves, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's one of the really unique things about what we're doing is we're integrating the design along with the factory. So we own the factory, and it really lets us gives us the flexibility that we can customize things. We also have standards that help people streamline things when they don't need the customization. But that's really given us a lot of flexibility and the ability to do this in the manner which we want to execute our projects.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people think of prefab stuff. The term modular comes to mind, and then people start thinking trailer, right?
Right.
That's like the progression that many people go through when they think about this. But I've seen the stuff that you're doing, and y'all are building these things like a site built house. Like it's stick framed. It's got zip panel sheathing on the outside. It's got whatever kind of siding product that you want. It's built like a site built home. It's just built in a controlled environment, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's absolutely built like a site built home, only a little bit better. Because of the transportation process, we have to use additional strapping, additional framing material. So it really makes a stronger and more robust build. But other than that, it's built to the same building code. So it's International Residential Code, IRC construction. And it's the same materials and the same process that goes into a site-built home. And in the end, you really can't tell the difference. And that's really what we're aiming for.
How do you handle the city issues on that? Because when you're building something in a factory, obviously so you're doing one in West U. West U inspectors are very picky.
Yes.
How do you deal with their requirements and get them to sign off on something that they're not inspecting during the process?
Well, the good news is, especially in Texas, the state has a very robust program. So the parts that are built in the factory fall under the state's regulatory inspection process. And that's really where our quality control process comes in too. So, there's a third-party review that happens in the factory, as well as our internal process. And then what the city is looking at is anything that's done on site. So for a home like that, the city would be inspecting the foundation, the utility connections, anything that's happening on site, and the pieces that happen in the factory are inspected through the state. And sometimes there's a little bit of a learning curve if building officials aren't familiar with that. But we have a great team that helps, really start early with dialogue and clear up any confusion so everybody's on the same page. And it's really actually worked quite smoothly for us.
Yeah. So like West U has some unique requirements that are beyond normal code that they require, like they require 5/8 drywall in West U. Do they try to apply those same standards to what you're doing?
Well, it can depend. So if if there's things in the code that are enhancements, sometimes we will do it that way. But really, in this situation, the state building code rules. So from a technical standpoint, we're building to what the state requires.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was just curious about that because several of the small municipalities have their own little requirements that they kind of tack on to the code. That's their little extra things. So so you're basically building. Is it TDLR? Is that the organization that oversees
That's right.
that?
Yes.
Okay. So they have their standards that you're meeting. You're going through their process, and so the city's not concerned as much about what's in the structure at that point, right?
That's right. Right. Because they have the confidence that it's done under this program,
right?
And that's how we can execute it.
Awesome. So what are the challenges in designing prefab structures versus designing a site build structure? Obviously, you have to factor transportation, right? So there's some dimensional issues.
Yeah.
What else?
Yeah, there has. I mean, what's been surprising to us, honestly, as architects, is we haven't been limited on the design, which is something that you might think, oh, there's going to be, certain limitations, but it's really thinking about the structure and how we're going to break it down into pieces. So if we're doing a multi-module project, we're thinking about how we can break this down into smaller pieces to deliver it, but it really hasn't limited us in terms of design. It does tend to lend itself more readily to, modern designs, which is our core, but we're also doing things that have a much more traditional look, and we've delivered projects, in a variety of styles. But it's really kind of that upfront piece of thinking about the design. But other than that, it hasn't been limiting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when you're breaking them down into modules, obviously you're probably limited by the width of a trailer or a road or however you're going to get it there, right? So you had to what's the maximum width that you kind of have to stay within for transportation?
Well, in Texas, the maximum is actually 20 feet, but we're not going that big. We've done 18 foot wide. It's a little bit more challenging. The sweet spot for us is really 16 feet wide, but that still gives you a really nice space. So for some of these smaller units like ADUs, a 16 foot wide space actually feels really nice in terms of scale. And then, that house you were mentioning that we've done some flood issues, that house had two modules put together that were 14 feet wide. That gave you a 28 foot wide open space in the end. So really, again, design wise, it doesn't limit us in having big open spaces.
So what other what other differences are there between again, designing for site built versus modular? What other considerations are there other than just size and dimension?
Well, one of the things is upfront, there is more engineering that goes into these, which is actually a benefit to the homeowner. We're doing full MEPs, which you might not find in typical site built construction. So, everything is actually designed and optimized, fully engineered. It's a benefit to the clients in the end. But it takes some upfront, work and coordination. So that's something that we factor into our process.
So are all the mechanical systems already installed in the unit? Obviously, with the exception of maybe like the AC condenser unit that gets set on the outside. But is everything else already installed in the unit? You just hook the condenser up?
Yeah, absolutely. So our process is really to try to do everything we can in the factory to minimize what has to be done in the field. So all of those systems are done in the factory, and then where there's multiple pieces coming together, we have what's called a crossover, where that connection is made on site. So it's really trying to minimize what has to be done in the field.
Yeah, so you mentioned how modern design lends itself more to that, and most of the examples on your website are that, right? And I love it, and I can tell that's where your sweet spot is, because those structures look fantastic. But I also did see some more bungalow style homes, which also lend themselves to that design, right?
Absolutely.
You think about the heights, kind of the traditional bungalow, more of the shotgun style house.
Right.
That lends itself very well to that style, right?
Yeah, that's right. And some of the projects we're doing for Altadena have kind of, the Spanish character to fit in with the neighborhood there. So it's really, understanding the context and how some of this can be either done in the factory or put some of this detailing on site to give it that final look. What
flexibility is there in design? either in modifying existing plans that you already have, or just starting from scratch and doing something from scratch? Is it cost effective to do a one-off design and do it in the factory, or is it more cost effective if you're doing a bunch of the same?
Well, obviously, from the factory standpoint, the larger the scale, or if it's got some repeatable pieces, that's going to make it ideal for factory production. But our history and our core is really doing these customized projects for people. And where it makes sense is, a project that has, a reasonable budget that's maybe competing with a custom home. That's certainly a candidate for this. If you're really looking for something that's low cost but doesn't have, a big scale to it, then the more that you can take a standard product that we have will help save money where you're really trying to stretch the budget.
Mm. But if someone came to you and said, Rame, I just want to design something from scratch, ADU for my backyard that has some certain dimensions limitations, you guys can just start from scratch and do it that way.
We could start from scratch. We honestly have done so many different ADUs at this point. If it was an ADU, we'd say, okay, we probably have something that's very similar to what you want, and then we could customize it from there. But yes, we've, custom homes, we've started from scratch and done the whole process. It's really just thinking through from the design, and that's where our background as architect comes in to help, really integrate that with the factory side.
So what applications are there for the prefab construction? I mean, ADUs we mentioned, which to me is great because you can crane those in over a lot of existing structures and drop it in the backyard. Whereas some sites are difficult to get back and do all that construction if you have narrow access down the sides of the house, and just saving the time and the hassle factor of having a long-term project going in the backyard, right? So you have some speed there as well. But outside of ADUs, what are other applications that you guys have seen?
Well, outside of ADUs, I mean, it's really, if the time is a factor for people, then this could be a really good fit. So typically we're saying that our construction really cuts the whole time frame in half. And that can be a really, big deal for somebody to get in their house, potentially 9 months to a year ahead of time. Mm-hmm. So, all of those are other costs that you can save that aren't directly in the construction budget. Things like your interest carry, having to live somewhere else, and just, the lifestyle piece of being able to get in your home faster.
Mm-hmm. So custom homes is one application. Developments, people who are developing either rental units or just developing land, right? Have you guys done this as well?
Yeah, and another place where we're seeing a lot of interest is on the hospitality side. So this would be a similar concept to an ADU, but more of a guest room that is, on property. So it's kind of this hotel concept, especially since COVID that's been growing, is people want to be out in nature and delivering to some of these locations that are more remote and difficult to build on. That's a really another good fit. So also, weekend homes, ranch style properties, weekend getaways where you don't want the disruption of having construction going on for months on your property. This is a really good fit to streamline that process.
And also just the labor force in some of those areas is hard to come across. So if you're doing something in the hill country where there's so much construction going on, there's a small pool of contractors, or more remote areas, right, like West Texas, where there's just no one out there to do the work.
Right.
It can be a great solution.
Absolutely.
How far are you guys able to ship?
We've shipped all the way to Santa Barbara, so quite far. And really, it just depends on where it's going to look at the transportation and delivery cost and what it costs to build there and see if it makes sense.
Are those being made in Houston and shipped over there?
That's right.
Wow, that's a long distance to move a structure.
Yeah.
So I know that the wildfires that happened out in California obviously just decimated a lot of neighborhoods. And so there's a big opportunity out there. I have several friends who have gotten into the rebuilding side of things out in California. have you guys tapped into that market at all? Are there people out there who are ordering product from you
Yeah.
guys to be shipped out there for that purpose? And are your structures able to be designed to meet those fire codes?
Yes, absolutely. So we've got several projects that we're getting ready to start construction on that are going to fire rebuilds. And the projects that we've already shipped to California are designed to meet what's called WUI, or Wildland Urban Interface. And that's the code that regulates kind of what the fire resistivity is. And some of the things that go into that is, what the exterior, fire rating and sheathing are. But it's everything in terms of the design too. We're really thinking about where, embers could land. It has tempered glass on the exterior, so there's a number of things that go in to meet that requirement.
So, are those generally like more smaller homes, larger homes? Like what size homes are you shipping from Texas to California?
Well, we've done ADUs, but also, multi-module projects could be, any number of sizes. And again, that goes back to just what is the project requirement and how many pieces go together. For the Altadena neighborhood specifically, kind of the sweet spot for what most people are looking to build is around 2,400 square foot.
Okay. And obviously the cost to build in California is astronomical.
Yes.
Right. Especially now that there's so much construction that needs to happen, and there, again, the availability of labor and materials out there. And so I imagine that even with the shipping cost from Texas, it probably still factors in to be advantageous to do that, right?
That's right. Absolutely. Yes. We're a value to people. We're delivering them a higher end product and faster than what they can do at site built, but at a less cost than what they could do if they were just hiring a site builder locally.
And I should call my friend out there and say, hey, let's buy some lots.
Yeah, let's work together on
ship
that.
Some houses to California.
Yes.
All right. So how do you deal with site, various site conditions? Obviously, if you're doing it here in Houston and you're doing it in a neighborhood that's got, 40, 50, 60, 70 foot lots, they're rectangles, they're flat here in Houston, it's easy to deal with. How does variations in site work when it comes to designing and planning prefab homes? Either ground that's not level, or where you're trying to take views into account, or all the things that go into good architecture planning, right?
Right. Well, that's something that we really look at up front, both from the architectural standpoint and how are we going to locate this project, but also from the delivery side. Is there access? What does that terrain really look like? But we've done projects. We've done a project in Austin where it was really located on a hillside. The basement was kind of carved out, so it was a daylight basement, and the modules all sat on top of that. So really kind of just understanding what the site conditions are, and like any other good architecture project, really designing it to fit those parameters.
So are you typically building these things on piers and having a crawl space foundation, or are they typically on slabs, or what's the foundation usually?
Well, the least expensive way to do it is pier and beam, but we also like to use grade beams where the concrete is really kind of sealing the underside, but it's still elevated to a certain degree. So that goes into kind of the design and planning process.
I imagine making the utility connections probably necessitates some kind of crawl space, right? To where you can get under there and connect it. Because if you're trying to set something onto a slab, that complicates things, right?
It complicates things. We can do it. Our engineers have a way of doing that, but most clients haven't elected to do that. Really, kind of the grade beam is kind of an intermediate option where it's giving them this solid foundation and appearance, but it's keeping it a little bit lower to the ground and still, minimizing kind of the foundation cost.
Okay. So I'm kind of backing up, thinking about the transportation side a little bit. What issues exist in transportation and how that affects, movement and materials? Because you said that you guys do more reinforcing and strapping and maybe spacing on framing, things like that are different. I have to imagine there's still some movement and some things that happen in transportation, right?
Yes.
With things separating, shifting, cracking, moving, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We like to joke that our buildings are hurricane and seismically tested before they get to the job site, because they've gone down the highway at, 60, 70 miles an hour, and they're moving a lot with the crane. So by the time it gets set, your building's actually, kind of gone through.
Pre-settled.
That's right. It's and really, what we've found is there's usually some minimal drywall cracking that we anticipate, and that's, part of the process. But we also utilize materials. We've even done, full 24 by 48 porcelain tile on the wall.
Wow.
And in an entire bathroom, and not had any cracks. So really kind of understanding we're using high quality materials, and that goes into part of what we're planning for.
Yeah, you're using a good solid backer
Yes.
Installation system for your tile and your
Right.
flooring and everything like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about how prefab construction can actually have a less environmental footprint than traditional stick-built construction, right? So how is waste reduced, and how is the environmental impact reduced compared to traditional construction?
Yeah, well, one of the big things is in the factory, because we have a controlled environment, we're really able to manage both our, material usage, but also, the waste aspect to that. So if there's smaller pieces of wood, they actually all get saved, and they can become blocking on the next house, which in site-built construction, if you're doing homes on scattered lots, it's actually very difficult to manage that. I mean, the reality is, as much as you want to be environmentally friendly, there's only so much you can do on site, and a lot of that is actually going into the dumpster.
Yeah.
So really, we're able to use, a much greater percentage of our all of our materials, even things like tile or wood flooring. We're really minimizing the amount of material usage and waste. And in the factory, we're also able to quantify that with what we were actually, the smaller amount that we're actually sending to a landfill, and by looking at our calculations, it's minimizing 90% of the waste.
Wow. Well, I know on like site-built homes, the framer is grabbing extra
Yes.
2x4s and whatever, and he's making makeshift scaffolding and bracing and all that kind of stuff, which I'm sure
That's right.
all that's eliminated, right?
That's right.
Yeah, because you're not. I assume that you have some things in your factory that are already set up to do your bracing and
Right.
and platforms and all that kind of stuff. So you're not. I don't care how good your framer is and what your relationship is and how you tell him not to do something. His guys are just going to go grab some 2x4s off the pile and start chopping them and shooting them up to, again, as little temporary ladders and platforms and job site tables. And there's so much waste that happens just from the guys just grabbing off the pile. And you're like, hey, we needed those studs.
That's right. That's right.
Now I got to order 20 more, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And really, starting with the design, we know, what our framing package looks like. We know how much material we're supposed to use. And we can also figure out, did we order the right amount, and really kind of tailor this so that we're not, ordering extra from the start. So that, plus the careful material usage. So that's one of the ways. Another thing that's really nice about what we're doing is we're minimizing the impact on site. So where there's trees or other, environmental sensitivities, instead of having construction go on for months, it's really the day it's putting the foundation in and the day we're delivering this that are the most, kind of intensive, time periods, but that's greatly reduced. So we're really able to kind of nestle projects in between existing trees, be sensitive about how we design the foundation around them, and minimize some of those site impacts as well. And, building in the factory, we can also, really get a robust, kind of building envelope that's really also helps, optimize our, AC systems. We already, talked about the fact that they're engineered. So all of these things are optimizing, the construction for the best outcome.
I imagine that you can kind of try to design with standard dimensions, right, to minimize or to optimize the sheet count and reduce the amount of cutting that has to take place too, right? So I always tell people if you can design things in standard increments, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, right, you're going to reduce the amount of cutting and labor, and you're not ordering custom sizes on things. You can kind of have a strategy to design something using standard sizing so that you're not having to do extra work, right?
Yes, yes, that is definitely part of our process. And also, where we do need to cut things, we can give the installer more specific directions about how to cut some things so that they're not having to, really do all the math and think about what's the best way to cut this sheet of material.
Mm-hmm. Do y'all do any testing in the factory, whether it's blower door testing or any sort of testing for certifications or anything like that?
Yes, so that's another really benefit to what we're doing, but all of the MEP systems get tested. So there's a full plumbing test where, we're turning the shower on in the factory and making sure that the water flows, where there's a dielectric test on the electrical. So we know, hey, there's no issues. So all of that really enhances the quality of the project.
Do and this is I have no clue about this, but we talk a lot about again, blower door tests, HERS ratings, energy efficiency type stuff. How much of that stuff goes into what you do? Are you able to blower door test a house? Do these things get HERS ratings, or is there a different rating system that's used for prefab construction?
No, it follows the same process. If it's a single module, we could do that blower door test in the factory. If it's multiple pieces going together, we're probably just going to do that test on site.
Okay. Are there any other like green building certifications or anything like that you are able to get?
Well, we've done LEED certified homes. We've done a number of rating systems. So it's just that a lot of those inspections would happen in the factory instead of on site. But the inspector can come in, we can document things. Our whole quality assurance process lends itself very well to any of those rating systems because we're already doing such a heavy documentation load already.
Do you see the prefab construction as being more resilient? We talked about fires a minute ago, but just climate, natural disasters in general. Do you guys take that into account? Is there any more resiliency than a site-built home?
Well, one of the interesting things is after Hurricane Andrew years ago in Florida, FEMA did a study and they looked at, of course, they looked at HUD construction, typical site-built construction, and modular construction. And anything that's HUD, which is basically mobile homes, were just decimated. They didn't even exist after the storm. But comparing modular and site-built construction, the modular homes fared much better than the typical site-built construction because of all of the extra structure that we were talking about that goes into the homes as part of the transportation process. So the fact that they were built in sections with more framing material and more strapping made them stronger on site, and they weathered the storm much better. So yes, resiliency is part of what we are doing.
Are you able to also get some of the windstorm ratings that are needed if it was more of a coastal area?
Yes, we've got some projects in the factory right now that are going down to Galveston, and those will have all the TDI windstorm requirements as well.
I was thinking about building a beach house using one of these, and how you could just have your big pilings sticking up in the air and come in there and put it on, strap it, and you're done.
Yeah,
that'd be an easy application. It seems like.
Yeah, it's really ideal for that. Because like you said, the module piece is just coming on top, and it really streamlines the whole process.
So we talked about resilience from climate issues. Another kind of resilience would be like supply chain resilience, which what I mean is like when something like COVID happens, right? And there's a disruption in the supply chain. And labor issues and all those sorts of things. It seems like prefab construction may have an advantage in those areas as well.
I think so, because we're already stocking and managing materials. And that's something that, if you're doing a project on site, you don't have the ability or the, room necessarily to pre-order or store things or stage things. So part of the factory process is we can consolidate some of these shipments, to maximize the efficiency, less trucks and less, and better pricing on our materials because we're buying in bulk.
Yeah.
But really being able to stage and manage that in a controlled environment is an advantage.
I would assume that you're not just calling the lumber yard and ordering 40 sheets of zip panel, right? Y'all are probably buying a container or something like that, or a truckload of a product, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's certain materials that, we may buy specific for our project, but other things, especially, lumber and some of these other kind of larger things, it makes sense for us to buy in bulk.
Yeah, and so that gives you an advantage with supply chain, probably also an advantage with some pricing because you're not paying kind of the inventorying and delivery and all that stuff that goes along with making lumberyard orders
right
every week or every month, right?
Yeah.
So how has that industry changed since you guys have started? And how many years have you been doing the prefab side of things, and how has it changed since then?
Well, we've been doing it for 10 years now, and what we've seen change over the last 10 years is really just the marketplace awareness. And I think people are starting to, see prefab more through things like Dwell Magazine and just seeing that projects are being done in this way. Some people are actually seeking it out, which is new for us. Really, we were doing a lot of explaining to show people what we were doing, and we still do that. But I think, people are more savvy and more aware now and are looking for solutions. And as it gets, more challenging to build, we see this as being a way to solve some of those challenges.
Yeah, I think people are frustrated with not only cost, but just the timelines that keep getting longer and longer. Yes. Every year. I mean, it seems like it takes 6 months longer to build a house now than it did 10 or 15 years ago.
Right.
And part of that's labor, part of that is just the requirements that keep getting added on from code and the cities and red tape and all those sorts of things, and so that the timeline has just gotten out of control. Right. And so by shaving 6 months or more off of that timeline, that's, you could be paying $5,000-8,000 a month in interest on your loan. So
that's right.
And $2,000 or $3,000 a month in rent. So
yes.
You're saving a pile of money by shaving 6 or 8 months off your project.
Yeah.
So again, I've kind of like the ADU conversation has increased. The whole prefab conversation has definitely increased over the last decade as well. And I think we'll keep seeing more and more of that. What other kind of innovations are coming along that you think may be coming down the road that might change what you're doing? I mean, things like 3D printing are starting to become a more and more of a thing. Automation. What of that do you see affecting you?
Well, we love the idea of integrating technology. I mean, for us, we're going to kind of take it in baby steps. We just came back and saw some factories in Europe that have full robotics and automation, and it's exciting to see, what some of these possibilities are. For us, it's more semi-automation and really, using some framing systems or things that can kind of speed some of those processes up. That's something that we're looking at doing in the future. But technology is changing, and by building in a controlled environment, we can utilize a lot of those systems for construction to really, enhance the building process.
So I was talking to, in fact, we were just talking earlier how that my friend Bradley Curtis, architect that used to work for you, he's doing some 3D printed houses right now, that are super cool. And one of the things that he was telling me was that doing 3D printing in Texas has a lot of limitations because you can't do some of that stuff outside in the summer because the heat is a limiting factor. So I was kind of wondering if translating some of that into a more of a controlled factory environment might be something that's in the future, because you're not concerned about the heat and the rain and all those sorts of things that limit the 3D printing in the field.
There are factories, one in California in particular, that integrates 3D printing into their process. That's not something that we've, personally looked at, but we're we see all of these technologies as an exciting way that we can help reduce cost and solve some of the problems with, challenges really with construction these days.
Yeah. I mean, that might be something that 10 years
Yeah.
down the road, you're
Sure.
like, yeah, we're doing that now.
You never know.
So is there any way that prefab construction can be used to address a housing affordability problem? I know we talked about how it's not necessarily cheaper all the time, but housing affordability is a huge issue, especially in major cities. And I know the city of Houston, Harris County, they're always looking at ways to improve housing affordability and access, right? Are there any strategies for developers who are looking to do more affordable housing, or cities who are looking to do that, to work with a prefab company to bring that to life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and really bringing good housing to scale is one of the, things that we're really passionate about, but it's also one of the ways that prefabrication can help in this process. So, for urban areas that have kind of these scattered lots, which is often the case, it's hard for, a production home builder or somebody at scale to go in and work on these scattered lots, in the urban context. But by building in a factory, you can get that scale and then deliver it in a way where you're really being efficient. So we've had some conversations, would love to help in that area.
Yeah. I could see the city of Houston, saying, "Hey, because the city buys lots and land and
Right.
sets that aside for these types of developments." I could see them approaching a prefab company and saying, how can we work together to make this happen?
Yeah.
And again, you don't have to, good housing and good design doesn't have to be super expensive, super fancy, right?
Right.
It can be good design and be relatively simple and relatively affordable. So it's all about good planning, right?
Yeah, and when we talk about good design, I mean, some of the things we care about, it's things like making sure there's natural light. How does the space feel? And it's really giving people a quality of life to their project and their space that enhances, their ability to live well beyond just the aesthetics. It needs to look good. It also needs to be durable. We don't want to be putting, homes out there, especially in an affordable housing context, that people can't afford to maintain, right? I mean, it needs to be all of those things.
Yeah. Great. All right. Well, I think that's about all I had. If just to kind of wrap this up, what's one thing that you would want our listeners, viewers to remember about integrating prefab construction into their next project development, their way of thinking?
Well, one of the things we've talked about is just that the possibilities are really limitless. So if there's something, that seems, like you want to pursue, would love to have people reach out to us. Equally, we see ourselves as a resource for builders. We're not trying to compete with the builder. We still need the builder to do the foundations and all of the site piece that goes into something. So we just see ourselves as sort of a super sub that can help builders really, bring more scale to their projects and streamline things, and also, deliver things in a better way for homeowners.
Awesome. Well, Rame Hruska, thank you so much for coming today. I appreciate you being here. And I'm going to come out and tour the factory sometime soon. I want to see it in action.
Sounds great.
All right. And thank all of you for listening and watching the Your Project Shepherd podcast. We'll see you next time. Thanks. If you found value in this episode of Your Project Shepherd podcast, please consider leaving us a review and sharing it with your friends. That helps us expand our reach and bring this content to more people. Thanks for being here.